Okay, take 3 now. It is 12:32 a.m. in the morning, and my name is TrashBabyy, I guess is my name on YouTube, and this is my first video. I clearly don't know what I'm doing, but let's start tonight off with a candle. I have lit this candle 3 times because I've messed up 3 times. Okay. Now my lighter's not working. So, much like a lot of people during this crazy quarantine time, I have no clue what I'm doing with my life right now. I mean, I felt that way for a while, but it's gotten pretty intense ever since, COVID. Oh, one of them didn't light. Let's fix that. So, I wanted to start this to pass the time and fill my days. That's a lot of fire for some reason. Fill my days so that I don't feel like I'm going crazy. Then again, I don't really know how much talking to myself and a camera will make me feel less crazy. And I feel like I've also said that 3 times because you get my point. So, again, I don't really have any plans for this channel, really. I don't really know what I'm doing. But I thought I would share some random little tidbits of my life. Some writing, some painting, some gaming, some music, everything. Because I'm the type to overshare, apparently. And, maybe someone might find these videos and feel a little less lonely during quarantine. Maybe that's my goal. That will be my goal. Have other little trash babies feel less alone. So we are starting my channel off with a reading. Sounds super boring, but I have some spooky stories, I guess. My originals, but I maybe will read some I find off of Reddit because we love those. Anyways, let's get started. "7 a.m. Losing time. Rapture came, passed, and nobody noticed yet. It should have been evident when the rain neglected to fall, when the fire started, when plagues of old began wrenching lives from the earth, and people started to turn against each other in ungodly outrage. Maybe the zombies were less than biblical, but if people were looking for a sign, then all they needed to do was open their eyes. According to outside sources, it had been 8 months since the World Health Organization demanded a global response to the pandemic, and 3 since that pandemic took a turn for the worst. The Lazi convent closed its doors to the public when matters began to escalate in the Philippines. Nobody entered, and nobody left. Not since the mad scramble for the vaccine, fueled by desire for fame, riches, and the visceral fear of death, created a monster born by human hands. The shot changed people, made them turn on each other, the sister said. Violence grew all around the world, and these changed men would take their pound of flesh with their teeth, mindless, hungry, undead. We are safe within the walls of the covenant, Ezekiel. Do not let your imagination fuel demonic fears. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." Proverbs 3:5-6. Ezekiel's voice was quiet as he responded to Lynn, and wondered if the pleased look on his elder sister's face meant that she saw a different being speaking through him. She often told stories of how God's messengers spoke through the elders or particularly blessed children. The other sister said that his habits made him more possessed than blessed, though. The migraines and nausea he had developed over the past month brought a pallor to his skin. It made him skinny and sickly. His mumblings didn't seem as blessed when they were coming from the lips of someone who looked COVID positives, but still somehow managed to test negative. Very good. It seems that all those horror movies you're too young for aren't impeding your studies after all, she teased, a smirk melting into the sound of her light-hearted words. The bemused tone was enough to have Ezekiel pulling his eyes away from his bedroom window and the clear view it gave him of the listless monsters banging at the convent gates. When they finally break in here, you'll be grateful I know how to survive in times like this, he responded, tone petulant. He wouldn't let his obsession with apocalypse-themed films be judged now, not when there was so much to learn from them that might actually be applicable in the real world for once. Her quirked lips distorted into something else, not really a frown, not really afraid, but near things. Sometimes Ezekiel couldn't tell what she thought about when she looked at him, the boy she practically raised. Maybe she was wondering where she went wrong. He couldn't focus on her morphing face when he was so drawn to the beings that lurked just past those walls. She tugged on her veil to properly cover her hairline and patted down her long skirt with one hand. Whatever monsters you see out there can't get you in here, Ezekiel. The only thing you should be afraid of is Mother when she realizes your chores aren't finished, and I'm not sweeping for you, she huffed before leaving the bedroom. The ruckus outside only grew louder, the opening of the massive gate resonating in his head like the squealing of pigs before slaughter. The noise made him nauseous. Were they finally confronting the horde that gathered outside the convent's walls? The gates closed again with a reverberating clang, the undertones of a gun being fired, creating a sharp prickling under his skin. He was safe here. He knew that. It just didn't feel that way anymore. His eyes flicked down to his watch, reading 11:36 a.m. He'd been staring outside for too long. Chores. Unsteady legs carried Ezekiel through the long corridors of the old building, crying boards cringing under his weight as he stepped over them, the paint peeled back as he walked by, blinking and revealing the bloodshot eyes of rotting wood. The convent was alive. It took deep breaths when the sisters weren't paying attention and screamed with every press of Ezekiel's foot on its knotted muscles. You're looking for a bucket and a mop, he reminded himself, to finish cleaning your room. A steady intake of breath made his steps firmer. And then it's lunchtime, Ezekiel. He twitched towards the sound of his name. The rasp of it was too old to be Lynn, and too unfamiliar to be Mother Army's scolding. It also wasn't coming from anywhere he could see. The boy just shook his head and kept walking, determined that he couldn't be distracted right now. If his cleaning duties weren't done by lunch, then he wouldn't have cake after dinner. His mumbling continued, listing his tasks for today and hoping the memory would take. Lunchtime, and then we get ready for afternoon mass. Ezekiel. The voice was firm, reprimanding, but not enough to make him pause and investigate. If he just kept going, it would stop eventually. Ezekiel. It would stop eventually, so he only walked faster. Get your chores done, then go to lunch, shower before mass, and Ezekiel. Paranoia dug its lecherous claws into his spine, and he found himself nearly running. Shower, mass, dinner, he listed to himself. Ezekiel seems to be having some trouble lately. That voice gave him reason to stop, coming to a halt next to a closed door. He's too old to be playing pretend, Sister Lynn. That was the Mother Superior. There's something wrong with him. Lynn's responding silence was enough of an answer for Ezekiel, sending him stumbling farther down the hallway and barreling past confused nuns in the stairwells. You're looking for a mop, a bucket, finished cleaning a room, he panted heavily, and finally stopped in front of a broom closet, mechanically taking what he needed before returning to his duties. He swore he only looked at the dead horde for a second before checking the time. 2 p.m. He missed lunch. Mass was spent sitting next to a somber Lynn, her quiet prayers burning into Ezekiel's skin as he tried to focus on his own worship, but his brain was pounding behind his eyes, enough to make him want to cry. The sound of the organ felt too loud in the poor boy's ears, the singing choir ringing and bouncing off the stone walls of the temple, echoing in his head. The church was close enough to the compound's walls that he could hear the groaning of the undead, their moaning so similar to the exaggerated wails of the women worshippers that came to exhaust themselves in the services to the Lord. Lynn told him once that they cried and pleaded loudly because they were afraid that God could not hear them. Ezekiel turned to her and found her crying as well. Did God not hear her anymore? Maybe it was because she was praying for him. He too closed his eyes to pray, and when he opened them again, he was standing outside the chapel, a confused Lynn staring at him. "Te," he called, the childish, affectionate term for elder sister in their language slipping past his lips. She looked so worried, or afraid. She must have felt both so often these days. Her hand reached out for Ezekiel's forehead, her brow furrowing further. "You're still feverish." Still. But Ezekiel couldn't remember being feverish before, nor did he recall service ending. She shook her head with a rueful smile and tugged the boy along. "Let's put you to bed now." They walked past the gate in the direction of the convent dorms, and he couldn't help but stare at the living dead. They clung to the gate bars like they were the ones imprisoned, moaning and wheezing with their rotted lungs. Lifeless eyes followed him as he was pulled along, and distorted words fell from their thick tongues, pleading for something that he couldn't understand. COVID was a nasty thing. The vaccine only made it nastier. Those were the stories. Stories from the sisters were all he got from the outside world. Only God knows if those stories were real. "Don't look at them, Ezekiel. They aren't allowed in here." "Of course they aren't. They'd kill us." Ezekiel finally looked away, his eyes meeting his elder sister's. She only grew more concerned. "They can't, not as long as we're inside." He checked his watch. 8 p.m. Mass ended hours ago. When Ezekiel was next conscious, he didn't wake up in bed. There was a rattling in his chest and a cough lodged in his throat as he tried to take in his surroundings. He was not in bed. He was at the gates. The air was humid, carrying the putrid scent of decay and disease, sticking its moist aftertaste onto his skin. Even now, the horde whimpered and begged and beckoned together, weakly calling for the living to get closer. "Let us in," they coughed, garbled by phlegm and congealing blood in scarred throats. Ezekiel took a shaky step forward, unsure, so lost in the pounding of his head and the hazy confusion of something terribly wrong. The movies didn't say that zombies could talk, part of him considered. The other part was already walking towards the gates to pull them open. His feet were sore, bare against the dry grass and cracked concrete. He felt the same as them. As they stared longingly through the bars, as illness took its toll on their bodies, they were so similar, he wasn't even sure if he was alive anymore. Then a firm hand gripped his wrist. "You're sleepwalking again." Lynn came into view, and Ezekiel's blurred world focused. He hadn't sleepwalked since he was a child. His weary head turned to the gates again, somehow opened by his half-conscious hands and the void of the monsters that normally lurked outside. They were just past the walls of the compound, but this was as far outside as Ezekiel had been since forever, since the end of the world started. "There is something wrong with me, isn't there? There was a strange emptiness to his voice, a resignation, as he stared at the empty space where the zombie should have been. Lynn just looked melancholy. "Mother Army is thinking that maybe we can find something, a doctor. You're probably sick, Ezekiel, not crazy." But the word crazy was enough to have pins pricking at the backs of his eyeballs, a wretched heat bringing forth tears he refused to let spill in front of his elder sister. The lungfuls of sticky air lacked oxygen. "What if," he rasped out. Suddenly Ezekiel was scared. "What if I am sick?" The words came out, a horrified whisper. Terror, a living beast growing in his lungs until it came crawling out his trachea. Words coming louder and louder. "What if I'm dying, just like them?" His echoing cries were cut off by Lynn's gurgled soprano. The symphony of it choked in a bloody cry. Her throat was gone, crushed between the rabid teeth of one of those mindless monsters, he thought. Ezekiel lurched forward then, grabbing her neck and shoving her down to put pressure on the wound and stop the blood from gushing between his fingers. It wasn't working. She wouldn't stop squirming and fighting his help. Ezekiel squeezed tighter around Lynn's neck. His head whipped around for his sister's attacker, but he didn't see the zombies. Where were the zombies? The orchestra of their wailing rose again in a fever pitch, the sound emerging from inside Ezekiel's head, and the ragged screaming sobs peeling from his throat slowly became indistinguishable from their suffering. If he squeezed tighter, harder, she would stop losing blood, and maybe he could still save her. Hands were grabbing at him, then yanking back, though he reached for the elder sister who raised him like her own. Later, he would think that they were so similar at that moment in time, her body still and cold and dead while he was decomposing from the inside. He was pulled into the bosom of their Mother Superior, face hidden from the gory sight. But he could still hear the tearing of flesh, the ripping of sinew from white bone. He could hear it, so it had to be real. Your name is Ezekiel. You're at the Lazi Convent. Today's date is October 28th, 2020. It is 1:44 a.m. Mother Army held him close as she grounded him with words, his wet face in her chest and heaving body pouring out endless grief. It didn't matter how loudly he cried or prayed or pleaded. There was no God to save them now. Okay, I hope that was okay. Even if I made mistakes. Apparently I can't read my own work. Also, there was a weird corruption, gross thing when my camera died, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to edit that shit together. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I would really appreciate if anyone watching subscribed and left a like or a comment or something like that. It would be really cool to have people join me on my weird YouTube adventure. So yeah, I hope I made somebody a little bit less lonely. That sounds so sad. Okay, good night. I'm done.